The plasma fire cut through the darkness like surgical knives, each bolt leaving trails of superheated air that made the engineering base shimmer with lethal beauty. Marcus Cole pressed his shoulder against a support beam, blood seeping through the makeshift tourniquet he'd tied with torn fabric from his maintenance uniform. The wrench in his right hand had been modified in the last 30 seconds, stripped wiring, creating a crude electrical discharge weapon that might buy him 3 shots before the improvised capacitor fried his nervous system, along with whoever he hit. 3 Valorian assassins moved through the smoke with practiced efficiency, their thermal signatures painting them as ghosts against his mental battlefield map. 58 years old, 27 of those spent in rooms exactly like this, one fighting enemies, who wanted him dead for reasons that changed with every war but never really mattered once the shooting started. The shoulder wound burned with the familiar ache of all the other times he'd been too slow, too old, too stubborn to die when smarter men would have run. They said a washed-up Navy SEAL couldn't protect an alien queen. They were about to find out why he'd survived 30 years of Black Ops missions in places that didn't exist on any map his government would acknowledge. The first assassin rounded the cooling tower. Marcus squeezed the wrench grip and prayed to gods he'd stopped believing in after Kabul. 72 hours earlier, the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Silver Spring, Maryland, smelled exactly like every VA facility Marcus had visited in the past decade, industrial cleaner failing to mask the underlying scent of desperation and bureaucratic indifference. He sat in the waiting room of the psychiatric wing, watching younger veterans scroll through phones while older men stared at walls that had stopped meaning anything years ago. The chair beside him held a manila folder containing his service record, or at least the parts they hadn't classified into oblivion, when his last mission went sideways in ways that still woke him up at 3 in the morning. Durtarishan arrived 20 minutes late, coffee-stained lab coat over business casual, that suggested she treated a dozen broken soldiers before lunch and would see a dozen more before dinner. She gestured him into her office without the pretense of small talk, something he appreciated more than she'd ever know. The desk between them held framed degrees from Johns Hopkins and enough prescription pads to medicate a battalion. She opened his file, scanning pages she'd probably read before their first session 6 months ago. "Your service record is impressive, Commander. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, classified operations across 14 countries. We can't discuss because the redaction team got creative with black markers. The nightmares are getting worse." Marcus watched rain streak the window behind her, counting droplets, because focusing on something mundane kept the other images at bay. "The dreams aren't nightmares, Doc. Nightmares you wake up from. These are memories with better lighting." Dr. Chen made a note in handwriting he couldn't decipher, probably the same hieroglyphics they taught in medical school, specifically so patients couldn't read their own charts. "The survivor's guilt is understandable given what happened in Kabul. You lost your entire team. 8 men. He said it flat, no emotion, the way you report casualty numbers to commanders who need statistics, not stories. Best operators I ever worked with. Miller, Jackson, Rodriguez, Kowalski. Chen, no relation, Patterson, Williams, and Thompson. Thompson was 23. Kid could strip an AK-47 blindfolded in under 20 seconds. The medication can help manage the anxiety responses." Dr. Chen pushed a prescription across her desk like offering communion to a lapsed believer. "But you need to let go of the idea that you could have saved them. Sometimes missions fail. Sometimes good people die. That's not your fault." Marcus left the prescription on her desk when he stood. He'd tried their pills before, little orange capsules that dulled the edges of everything until he couldn't tell the difference between threats and shadow. "I don't know how to not fight, Doc. 30 years, that's what I did. That's who I am. You take that away, there's nothing left. Then maybe it's time to find something new to fight for." Her voice softened with genuine concern that made his chest tighten with the uncomfortable realization that she actually cared whether he showed up to their next appointment. Something worth protecting instead of something worth destroying. The parking garage outside held his 15-year-old Ford pickup, primer gray, and held together with spare parts and stubbornness. He'd bought it cash from an estate sale after some other veteran decided a bottle of whiskey and his service pistol made better therapy than prescription drugs and talking about feelings. The irony wasn't lost on him. His apartment in Tacoma Park waited with all the personality of a storage unit, furniture from Goodwill walls bare, except for the nail holes from previous tenants kitchen stocked with protein powder and black coffee, because cooking for one person felt like admitting defeat. The only decoration lived in the top drawer of his dresser, medals and ribbons he'd earned in wars politicians swore were necessary right up until the moment they became politically inconvenient. The Navy SEAL trident pin lay wrapped in the American flag they'd given him at Thompson's funeral, 23 years old, and full of holes that no amount of ceremony could patch. He set the folder on his kitchen counter and opened his laptop, 5 years old, and running operating systems the government had stopped supporting, but it worked for the only thing he needed: job applications. The list grew longer every week. Private security firms, government contractors, corporate bodyguard positions, anything that might use the skills he'd spent 3 decades perfecting. The rejection emails piled up with mathematical precision. Your qualifications are impressive. However, we've decided to pursue candidates with more recent operational experience. We appreciate your service, but our client base requires personnel who can pass the physical fitness standards for active duty. Your background suggests you might be overqualified for this position, code for too expensive, too damaged, too much liability, if the PTSD made him unreliable. The final email arrived Tuesday morning from a security consulting firm in Arlington that recruited former special operations personnel for high-risk executive protection. He'd served with their CEO in Iraq back when improvised explosive devices were still improvised, and everyone thought the war would end before Christmas. Marcus, appreciate you reaching out. Your record speaks for itself, and I'd hire you in a heartbeat if this were 2010. But the reality is clients want younger blood guys who can run marathons and look good in suits while doing it. You're 58. That's not a dig, brother. It's just math. Maybe consider transitioning to training or consulting. Desk work pays the bills, and nobody's shooting at you. Take care of yourself. Semper Fi. He closed the laptop and stared at his reflection in the black screen, seeing the ghost of who he used to be, haunting the face of who he'd become. 58 years old, dishonorable discharge buried in classified paperwork because his last mission had involved saving civilians instead of following orders. PTSD that made sleep a combat zone and savings account that would last another 8 months if he stopped eating anything that wasn't ramen noodles. The phone buzzed with a text from Miller, his former teammate, the one who'd survived Kabul because someone had to stay back and coordinate logistics. Heard about the Arlington gig. Sorry, man. You looking at anything else? Marcus typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on the truth, running out of options. Might need to get creative. Miller's response came within seconds. Friend of mine works facilities management at the new Galactic Diplomatic Center in DC. They're hiring maintenance staff. I know it's not what you want, but it's steady work and decent benefits. Want me to send your info? Pride was a luxury unemployed veterans couldn't afford. Marcus sent back a thumbs-up emoji and returned to staring at his reflection until the screen timeout turned it black. The interview happened Thursday at 9 in the morning, conducted in a basement office of the most expensive building Marcus had ever entered. The Galactic Diplomatic Center rose 40 stories above Constitution Avenue, glass and steel architecture, designed to make visiting alien dignitaries feel like humanity had evolved beyond petty nationalism into something worthy of interstellar respect. The reality in the basement told a different story. Cinderblock walls, fluorescent lights, and metal desks that looked like surplus from the Carter administration. Nyla Reynolds ran human resources with the efficiency of someone who'd processed thousands of applications and stopped being impressed by credentials around the time the first alien species made formal contact with Earth. She wore business casual and reading glasses on a chain, scanning his resume with the interest most people reserve for grocery lists. Your military service is noted. She said it like acknowledging he'd mentioned the weather. But this position is facilities maintenance. You'd be responsible for basic repairs, cleaning, monitoring environmental systems. It's not glamorous work, Commander Cole. Ma'am, I've cleaned worse things than floors. Marcus kept his voice neutral, professional, the same tone he'd used briefing generals who'd never seen combat but liked playing chess with other people's lives. I understand the job requirements. She studied him over the rim of her glasses, making some calculation he couldn't read. The pay is $38,000 annually, health benefits after 90 days standard federal employee package. You'll report to engineering, Chief Rodriguez. Background check will take 2 weeks. Can you start immediately after clearance? Yes, ma'am. The background check returned clean or clean enough that whatever they found in his classified files didn't disqualify him from mopping floors and fixing toilets in a building where the fate of interstellar diplomacy got negotiated 40 floors above his head. The security badge they issued had his photo looking 10 years older than he felt, identification number and clearance level that granted access to mechanical rooms, but not the diplomatic wings where actual important work happened. He started Monday morning reporting to engineering Chief Rodriguez in the sub-basement, where massive HVAC systems control climate for 47 different alien species whose environmental needs range from Antarctic cold to furnace heat. Rodriguez was 52, former Army Corps of Engineers, the kind of supervisor who'd done every job he asked his people to do, and remembered what it felt like. Colwright Rodriguez offered a handshake that tested grip strength without making it obvious. Miller spoke highly of you, said you could fix anything with duct tape and spite. Miller's optimistic. Most things I fix with duct tape stay broken. They're just broken quietly. Rodriguez laughed, genuine amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. You'll fit in fine. Come on, I'll show you the systems. The tour lasted 3 hours, covering mechanical rooms that serviced different sections of the building, emergency protocols, the Byzantine complexity of maintaining life support for species who breathe different atmospheric compositions and metabolize toxins that would kill humans in minutes. Marcus cataloged everything with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent years memorizing base layouts before missions, escape routes, security blind spots, structural vulnerabilities. This is Level 3, diplomatic quarters. Rodriguez gestured at a corridor lined with doors marked in languages Marcus didn't recognize. You'll mostly work overnight here. Ambassadors don't appreciate maintenance staff interrupting their beauty sleep. The security stationed at each intersection watched them pass with the bored vigilance of people paid to stand in hallways, looking intimidating. Marcus recognized the type: private contractors, probably former military, but not Tier 1 operators wearing tactical gear that looked good in photos but wouldn't save them if someone serious came through those doors. Your guards are positioned wrong. The words left his mouth before his brain edited them. Too clustered, too visible. Anyone planning an assault would bypass these checkpoints entirely using maintenance access. Rodriguez stopped walking, expression shifting from friendly to evaluating. You thinking about assaulting the building? Cole Marcus met his eyes without flinching. I'm thinking your security consultant sold you theater instead of protection. Overlap coverage on primary corridors, ignore secondary access points, no roaming patrols. It's designed to make diplomats feel safe, not actually keep them safe. And you know this, how 30 years making places like this very unsafe for people who thought they were protected. Marcus kept his tone factual, neither boasting nor apologizing. I can spot the holes because I used to be the thing crawling through them. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Miller didn't tell me you were SEAL. He said you were Black Ops, but didn't specify. Most of what I did doesn't exist in any official record. Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the attention. I'm here to fix pipes and mop floors, Chief. The tactical assessment was free of charge. They resumed walking, but something had changed the way Rodriguez looked at him now, like reassessing initial impressions and finding them incomplete. Keep that tactical brain to yourself unless I ask for it. Last thing I need is guards thinking the new janitor is casing the building. Marcus spent his first week learning the layout, memorizing patrol schedules, understanding the rhythm of a building that never slept. Diplomats arrived and departed at all hours. Translators worked midnight shifts. Cafeteria staff prepped meals at 4 in the morning for breakfast meetings where Earth's future got negotiated over coffee and pastries. He cleaned conference rooms and replaced air filters, fixed leaking pipes, and responded to maintenance calls invisible to the people who mattered, and visible only to the people like him, the ones who kept the machinery running while everyone else took credit. Friday night, he was checking environmental controls on Level 3 when he noticed the readout showing temperature fluctuations in the Valorian delegation quarters. Minor variations, probably nothing but his training, had taught him that minor anomalies killed people who ignored them. He pulled up the diagnostic logs on his tablet, cross-referencing against baseline readings from the past month. The pattern emerged like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Temperature spikes correlated with scheduled diplomatic events, specifically when the Valorian Queen was present. Someone was introducing heat stress into her quarters, subtle enough to avoid immediate notice, but consistent enough to suggest deliberate action rather than system malfunction. Marcus downloaded the logs onto a USB drive he carried for exactly these situations. The paranoia of someone who'd learned early that institutional memory had convenient gaps whenever investigations started asking uncomfortable questions. He returned the system to normal parameters and filed a routine maintenance report noting minor calibration adjustments, nothing that would trigger alerts or draw attention. That night in his apartment, he pulled up everything he could find about the Valorian delegation. Queen Sarah Valerian aged 29 in human equivalent years, though Valorians live significantly longer lifespans. She'd assumed the throne 5 years ago after the death of her predecessor in what official reports called natural causes, but conspiracy theorists suggested might have been politically convenient timing. The Valorian Empire controlled 17 star systems and represented one of Earth's most valuable trading partners. Rare minerals, advanced biotechnology, cultural exchange programs that made humanity look civilized to the dozen other species still debating whether to open formal relations. Political opposition came primarily from Duke Saren, a conservative faction leader who'd opposed Sarah's coronation and continued advocating for traditional governance structures that apparently didn't include queens who pushed diplomatic solutions over military expansion. Nothing in the public records suggested assassination attempts or coup plots, but then nothing in Marcus's service record mentioned the time he'd prevented a nuclear exchange between two nations whose names stayed classified. He filed the information in the back of his mind. Professional paranoia cataloging threats that might be nothing or might be the warning signs everyone ignored until the body count made denial impossible. His job was fixing pipes, not protecting royalty. He'd learned in Kabul what happened when he exceeded his mission parameters to save civilians medals they couldn't publicly award and discharge paperwork that ended his career. The maintenance call came through his radio Tuesday afternoon while he was replacing ceiling tiles in a conference room on level 7. Rodriguez's voice carried urgency that made Marcus's combat instincts wake up and start scanning for threats. Cole needs you on level 3 immediately. HVAC system is showing critical failure temperature climbing past safe thresholds. We've got maybe 8 minutes before the entire diplomatic wing becomes uninhabitable. Marcus dropped the ceiling tile and ran training overriding the years and injuries that made running hurt. The stairwell access bypassed the elevators, taking stairs 3 at a time, while his radio crackled with updates that painted a picture of controlled chaos turning into legitimate crisis. Evacuation protocols initiated. Security is moving ambassadors to emergency shelter areas. We're losing environmental control across the entire wing. He hit level 3 at a full sprint, finding corridors filled with smoke and panicked diplomats being herded toward exits by guards who looked terrified beneath their tactical stoicism. The heat hit him like opening an oven door, temperature already past 100 degrees and climbing with every second, humidity making it feel like breathing through wet towels. The main environmental control room was sealed behind security doors that required clearance levels Marcus didn't have. He pulled his badge and swiped it anyway because sometimes security systems failed in predictable ways, and swore when the red light flashed denial. The window showed flames inside, something burning that shouldn't be burning, smoke billowing from electronics that had been sabotaged with professional precision. Marcus keyed his radio. Rodriguez's main control room is compromised. Fire suppression system isn't activating. I need manual override authorization. Override granted. Rodriguez's voice tight with stress. But Cole, if that fire spreads to the coolant lines, I know. The coolant lines carried chemical compounds that were inert under normal conditions, but explosive when superheated, a safety feature designed to prevent exactly this scenario by making sabotage theoretically impossible. Whoever planned this understood the systems well enough to turn safety mechanisms into weapons. He ran to the secondary access point, a maintenance hatch that connected to the crawl space above the control room. The metal ladder burned his palms even through work gloves, but he climbed anyway. Muscle memory from 100 insertions in hostile environments, overriding pain signals that wanted him to stop and reconsider life choices. The crawl space was hell narrow, dark, filled with pipes hot enough to brand skin. Marcus crawled through with his tablet, pulling up system schematics and calculating which valve he needed to close before the pressure differential caused a cascade failure that would kill everyone still on level 3. The math was simple. The execution required reaching through superheated steam to turn a manual override that hadn't been touched since installation. He wrapped his uniform shirt around his right hand, said a prayer Thompson used to recite before every mission, and grabbed the valve wheel through the steam. The shirt ignited. His palm blistered. He turned the wheel anyway, feeling metal give way as pressure equalized, and the screaming hiss of escaping steam dropped to background noise. The fire suppression system finally activated halon, flooding the control room and killing flames that had already consumed most of the electronics. Marcus extracted himself from the crawl space with burns covering his right hand and arm uniform, smoking lungs full of chemical fumes that made breathing feel optional. Rodriguez found him sitting against the corridor wall, cradling his burned hand, while automated announcements declared environmental controls restored to normal parameters. Medics were pushing through the crowd, treating minor heat casualties and checking diplomats for smoke inhalation. Jesus Christ, Cole. Rodriguez stared at the burns. You just saved 300 people. I stopped the fire from spreading. Marcus stood, refusing the hand Rodriguez offered because accepting help felt like admitting weakness. Someone else started it, and whoever did knows these systems better than we do. The paramedic who examined his burns had the gentle efficiency of someone who'd treated worse injuries and knew when patients would refuse transport regardless of medical advice. Second-degree burns, possible third degree on the palm. You need to go to the hospital. I need to check the coolant lines and confirm the primary system is actually stable. Marcus pulled his hand back from her gentle probing. Hospital can wait until I know this building isn't going to explode. Rodriguez made a call with his eyes, some calculation between supervisor responsibility and tactical pragmatism. You've got 2 hours. Then you're going to the ER, whether you walk there or I have security drag you. The investigation started while Marcus was still checking valve pressure and documenting damage patterns. Security contractors swarmed the control room, forensic teams photographing evidence, and supervisors demanding answers nobody had. The official consensus emerged within 90 minutes: electrical malfunction caused by aging infrastructure and delayed maintenance, tragic but predictable recommendations forthcoming about budget increases for system upgrades. Marcus said nothing while they explained their findings, watching investigators catalog exactly what they expected to find and ignore everything that contradicted their predetermined conclusions. The scorch patterns were wrong, originating from deliberate ignition points rather than electrical shorts. The timing was too convenient, occurring during a scheduled diplomatic reception when maximum casualties would result. The backup systems had been disabled with precision that suggested someone understood exactly which failures would cascade into catastrophe. He left the investigation team to their comfortable lies and returned to the crawl space while they weren't watching. The tablet light revealed what he'd glimpsed during the crisis: residue patterns consistent with thermite charges, small but strategically placed to maximize damage. Chemical analysis would confirm it, but Marcus had set enough breaching charges in his career to recognize deliberate demolition when he saw it. Someone had tried to kill everyone on level 3. Someone with access, technical knowledge, and motivation that went beyond simple terrorism into targeted assassination disguised as system failure. The Valorian Queen had been scheduled for the diplomatic reception. Her quarters were on level 3. The temperature manipulations he'd noticed last week had been reconnaissance testing response times and security procedures. This wasn't random. This was preparation for murder. Marcus downloaded photos onto his USB drive and retreated before investigators noticed the janitor paying too much attention to their crime scene. His burned hand throbbed with every heartbeat, blisters already forming across his palm where the valve wheel had branded him. The ER could wait. First, he needed to warn someone who might actually listen instead of filing his concerns under paranoid veteran sees conspiracies everywhere. Finding the Valorian Queen proved easier than expected. Her security detail, still clustered in the emergency shelter area on level 1 guards, surrounding a woman who stood nearly 8 feet tall and looked entirely out of place among the crisis management chaos. Sarah Vallon wore ceremonial armor that somehow managed to be both functional and elegant. Deep blue metal worked with silver patterns that caught the emergency lighting. She was listening to security briefings with an expression that suggested patience worn thin by bureaucratic incompetence. Marcus approached the perimeter, knowing he looked exactly like what he was: maintenance worker with burns and smoke damage. No authorization to be anywhere near royalty, suspicious enough that 3 guards moved to intercept before he got within speaking distance. "Ma'am, we need to move." His voice cut through their protest parade ground volume that made people stop and listen whether they wanted to or not. This wasn't an accident. Someone tried to kill you today. The guard's tensed hands moving toward weapons. Sarah's attention focused on him with the intensity of someone who'd survived long enough to recognize when threats were unexpected faces. Who are you, maintenance worker, who just stopped your assassination from succeeding? Marcus met her eyes without flinching, too tired and hurt to bother with proper deference. Someone planted thermite charges in the environmental control systems. They knew you'd be on level 3 during the reception. They knew exactly how to sabotage backup systems. This was professional work. One of the guards stepped between them, establishing physical barrier. Your Majesty, this man has no clearance to, I have evidence. Marcus held up his tablet, showing the photos he'd taken. Residue patterns, placement timing. Everything points to deliberate sabotage, targeting Valorian delegation quarters. If I'm wrong, arrest me. But if I'm right and you ignore this, the next attempt won't fail. Sarah raised one hand gesture, silencing her guard's objections. Show me. Marcus stepped forward, aware of how easily these guards could kill him if they perceived threat. He pulled up the photos, explaining technical details that made security eyes glaze over but kept the Queen's attention locked on his tablet screen. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture institutional investigations would ignore because acknowledging assassination attempts meant admitting security failures. When he finished, Sarah studied him with an expression that calculated more variables than he could track. You're bleeding, second-degree burns. Marcus glanced at his hand, noticing for the first time that blisters had ruptured and fluid mixed with blood. It'll heal. You saved my life, and you're telling me it'll heal. Sarah's tone carried something between amusement and respect. What's your name, Marcus Cole? Used to be Commander Cole, but that was a different life. Used to be. Her eyes narrowed, reading between words the way intelligence officers learn to extract meaning from careful omissions. And now you clean floors in buildings you could probably infiltrate blindfolded. Now I fix pipes and try not to think too hard about the career that ended when I chose saving civilians over following orders. Marcus pocketed his tablet. Ma'am, someone in your delegation or someone with access to your security protocols just tried to kill you. The official investigation will call this an accident because that's easier than admitting someone penetrated their security. You need to take this seriously. I do take this seriously, Commander Cole. Sarah gestured to one of her guards. Run full background on this man. I want to know everything, including the classified parts his government pretends don't exist. The guard departed with the efficiency of someone who'd executed similar orders before. Sarah returned her attention to Marcus, measuring him against some internal standard. You have two options, Commander. You can go to the hospital and forget this conversation happened. Or you can come with me and explain exactly how someone tried to kill me and what we're going to do about it. Marcus thought about his apartment, his unemployment, the prescription for PTSD medication sitting on Dr. Chen's desk that he'd never filled. He thought about Thompson dying at 23 because Marcus hadn't been good enough to save him. He thought about burning his hand on a valve wheel to prevent deaths that wouldn't happen because he'd been there to stop them. Lead the way, Your Majesty. I've got opinions about your security that your guards won't like. The medical bay treated his burns with Valorian technology that reduced healing time from weeks to days, strange blue gel that cooled the pain to manageable levels and accelerated tissue regeneration. The doctor was human, Dr. Sarah Park, efficient and unimpressed by either royalty or stubborn veterans who ignored medical advice. You should have come here immediately. Park wrapped his hand in bandages that looked too thin to protect anything. These burns could have caused permanent nerve damage. Most things I do could cause permanent damage. Marcus flexed his fingers, testing range of motion. Part of the job description. Park glanced at Sarah, who watched from the doorway with patient attention. Your job description is maintenance, not heroics. Maybe stick to one or the other before you run out of skin to burn. The conference room they escorted him to was small, private, swept for surveillance devices by guards who took their paranoia seriously. Sarah dismissed everyone except her primary security chief, a Valorian male named Terran, who looked at Marcus with the suspicion reserved for threats that hadn't revealed their true nature yet. Explain how you knew this was sabotage when our own security teams called it system failure. Sarah sat across from him, ceremonial armorer, making her look like the warrior queen history would remember. What did you see that they missed? Marcus pulled up his tablet, walking through the evidence with the methodical precision of after-action briefings. scorch patterns timing backup system failures, temperature manipulations in the week prior. Each detail added weight to conclusions that became harder to dismiss as paranoid veteran seeing conspiracies. Theron interrupted with technical questions that revealed deeper understanding than typical security personnel possessed. You're suggesting someone with engineering expertise and security access. That's a very small pool of suspects. That's why investigations will avoid reaching that conclusion. Marcus met his eyes without hostility. Nobody wants to believe the threat came from inside their own organization. Easier to blame old equipment than confront the reality that someone you trust wants you dead. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing implications that extended beyond simple assassination attempt into political conspiracy. The Valorian Council has been pressuring me to accept arranged marriage to Duke Saren. Unify political factions, strengthen traditional power structures. I've refused, because arranged marriages in political contexts are usually code for surrendering authority. Marcus didn't phrase it as question. Saren wants the throne, not a wife. Killing you solves his problem more permanently than marriage. You speak very directly for someone who cleans floors, Commander Cole. Sarah's tone carried approval beneath the observation. Most people dance around uncomfortable truths when addressing royalty. I learned a long time ago that people die when everyone's too polite to state obvious facts. Marcus pocketed his tablet. Ma'am, you asked why I knew this was sabotage. Truth is, I've been planning attacks on buildings like this for 3 decades. I know what competent assassination attempts look like because I've executed them. Whoever tried to kill you today has training resources and inside access. That makes them significantly more dangerous than random terrorists. And you're telling me this why Theron's hand rested near his sidearm, not threatening but ready. You've identified yourself as someone capable of exactly what we're trying to prevent. Because I'm the only person in this building who's taking the threat seriously and has the skill set to actually stop it. Marcus stood, his burned hand aching despite the medication. You can trust me or not, but I'm done pretending maintenance workers notice things security professionals miss by coincidence. I saved your queen's life today. Next time someone tries, I'd prefer to see it coming instead of cleaning up the aftermath. Sarah raised one hand before Theron could respond. Commander Cole, I'm going to research your background very thoroughly. If what you're telling me is true, if you have the expertise you claim, then I need that expertise protecting me instead of fixing pipes. But if this is some elaborate scheme, I will have you disappeared into places that make black sites look comfortable. Ma'am, if I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Marcus held her gaze. I'm offering to help because I'm tired of watching people die when I could have prevented it. You want my protection, you have it. You want me back on maintenance duty, that's fine too. But either way, someone is going to try to kill you again, and your current security won't stop them. The silence stretched between them, tension balanced on diplomatic knife's edge. Finally, Sarah nodded, once decision made with the finality of someone accustomed to command. You have 48 hours to prove you're worth the risk. Theron will provide access to security files and delegation records. Find whoever tried to kill me today. If you succeed, we'll discuss permanent arrangements. If you fail, you return to maintenance, and we never speak of this again. And if another attempt happens before I find them, Marcus kept his voice neutral, then we'll both be dead and this conversation becomes irrelevant. Sarah stood, ending the meeting with the authority of royalty who'd said everything requiring words. Dismissed, Commander. Marcus returned to his apartment at 3 in the morning, exhausted and running on combat stimulation that would crash into depression the moment his nervous system remembered it was supposed to feel safe. The USB drive held everything he'd collected: photos, logs, security footage. The puzzle pieces of an assassination attempt that official channels would ignore, because acknowledging conspiracy meant accepting accountability for failures. He opened his laptop and began the work he'd done for 3 decades, hunting threats that hid behind bureaucratic protection and political convenience. Somewhere in the personnel files and access logs, someone had left fingerprints. Someone always did. Finding them was just a matter of looking in places nobody wanted to search. The coffee pot gurgled to life while spreadsheets populated his screen. Names, clearances, schedules. Maintenance workers and security contractors, diplomatic staff and engineering personnel, anyone with access to level 3 during the week prior to the attack, anyone with technical knowledge to plant thermite charges, Anyone with motivation to see the Valorian queen dead. The list was longer than he'd hoped, but shorter than he'd feared. 47 names with appropriate access and timing. Cross-reference against political affiliations and financial records, and the list dropped to 12 with potential motivation. Add technical expertise and it became 6. One of those 6 had tried to commit mass murder today. One of those 6 would try again. Marcus highlighted the names and began deeper research, pulling threads that would unravel into conspiracy or paranoid coincidence depending on what evidence revealed. His phone buzzed at 7 in the morning. Miller's text read, "Heard you had some excitement at work. You okay?" Marcus typed back, "Define okay. Got promoted from janitor to counterterrorism investigator. Resume looking better by the minute." Miller's response came with laughing emoji. "Only you could turn maintenance work into classified operations." "Stay safe, brother." Marcus didn't respond because staying safe had never been his strength. 30 years of missions proved that conclusively. He saved the spreadsheet and showered washing smoke smell and dried blood from skin that bore scars from a dozen countries that hadn't wanted him there but needed what he could do. The face in the mirror looked older than 58, gray stubble and lines that came from stress rather than laughter. But the eyes were the same ones that had stared down terrorists and warlords, dictators, and drug cartels. The eyes of someone who'd survived because he was meaner, smarter, and more stubborn than the things trying to kill him. Sarah Vallon needed those eyes watching for threats her security team would miss. She needed someone too damaged by experience to believe comfortable lies about accidents and system failures. She needed a broken weapon pointed at her enemies instead of rusting in bureaucratic storage. Marcus returned to the Galactic Diplomatic Center at 9 in the morning, security badge granting access he had never officially been authorized to possess. Theron waited in the conference room with personnel files spread across tables and suspicion carved into his expression. "Your background check came back with more redactions than readable text." Theron pushed a folder across the table. "Navy SEAL for 27 years, multiple commendations. Black operations in countries our government officially denies visiting." Then nothing medical discharge with classification levels, suggesting someone very important wanted you to disappear quietly. "I saved a village full of civilians instead of following orders to level the entire compound because intelligence suggested high-value targets might be present." Marcus opened the folder, scanning his own life reduced to bullet points and bureaucratic euphemisms. The high-value targets were actually children's schoolhouse. Intelligence was either incompetent or lying. "Either way, I wasn't going to be part of mass murder, so they discharged you rather than court-martial." Theron's tone shifted from suspicion toward grudging respect. Politically cleaner than admitting the mission parameters themselves were war crimes. "Turns out, saving civilians makes you a liability when certain senators prefer plausible deniability over accountability." Marcus closed the folder. "But I'm not here to relitigate my service record. Where do we start?" The personnel files painted portraits in bureaucratic detail, employment histories, security clearances, psychological evaluations, sanitized to meet legal requirements while revealing nothing useful. Marcus spread 47 suspect folders across the conference table, like tarot cards predicting futures nobody wanted to see. Theron watched from the opposite side, Valorian features unreadable in the way security professionals learn to hide thoughts behind professional masks. 3 names kept surfacing in pattern analysis that felt less like coincidence and more like fingerprints left by arrogance. Keith Torvin, Valorian noble assigned to Sarah's diplomatic staff, vocal opponent of her policies, family ties to Duke Saren's conservative faction. Ambassador Laura Barnes, State Department, career diplomat, impeccable record managing interspecies relations, financial disclosure forms showing investments in defense contractors who profited from diplomatic failures. General Raymond Mitchell, retired Marine Corps current security consultant for the Galactic Diplomatic Center, decorated combat veteran, with opinions about alien integration that made xenophobia sound like strategic thinking. Marcus tapped Keith's file with knuckles that bore scars from 30 years of close quarters combat. He has access, motivation, and direct connection to Saren. Classic inside threat profile, trusted position, used to facilitate external attack. Too obvious. Theron pulled up security footage on the conference room display movements, efficient in ways that suggested military background, despite diplomatic posting. Keith argued against the Queen's policies openly. Assassins work in shadows, not spotlight, unless the spotlight is misdirection. Marcus stood pacing the small room because sitting still made his nervous system think the threat had passed, and he'd learned in Kabul that relaxing got people killed. In psychological operations, you create obvious suspects to draw attention from real conspirators. Keith's public opposition makes him visible target for investigation, while someone quieter does actual work. The footage showed Keith's movements during the 72 hours before the attack, diplomatic meetings, private quarters, engineering levels, twice for what logs listed as environmental comfort adjustments. Marcus paused the playback, zooming into timestamps that created damning timeline. What legitimate reason does diplomatic staff have visiting engineering at 2 in the morning? Theron cross-referenced access logs against Keith's security badge, fingers moving across the holographic interface with practiced speed. None listed. Either he borrowed credentials or someone provided override authorization. Marcus pulled up personnel assigned to overnight engineering shifts. 3 technicians, 1 supervisor, all human contractors with backgrounds in HVAC systems, and no apparent connection to Valorian politics. Except one name triggered recognition from his earlier analysis. David Park's civilian contractor brother, to Dr. Sarah Park, who treated Marcus's burns, employed 6 months security clearance granted after background check, that somehow missed his prior work for defense contractor owned by Shell Company, traced back to Laura Barnes's investment portfolio. There's your connection. Marcus highlighted the ownership chain, following money through corporate structures designed to obscure rather than illuminate. Barnes funds the contractor employs. Park has access to environmental systems and technical knowledge to sabotage them. Keith provides intelligence about the Queen's schedule and security protocols. The pieces assembled into conspiracy that extended beyond simple assassination into coordinated effort involving American officials and Valorian nobles. But we don't know Saren's involvement beyond Keith's family connection. Theron pulled up Valorian intelligence reports, classified documents that painted Duke Saren as ambitious traditionalist who'd opposed Sarah's coronation through legal channels. No evidence of assassination attempts or criminal conspiracy, yet. Marcus corrected fatalism settling into his voice like familiar weight. No evidence yet. Conspiracies don't announce themselves until body counts make denial impossible. The safe house Marcus suggested violated every diplomatic protocol regarding protective custody of visiting royalty. His apartment in Tacoma Park offered none of the luxury Sarah's position demanded, and all of the anonymity her survival required. Theron's objections lasted until Marcus explained how 5 assassins had breached the last 3 safe houses he'd defended because everyone knew where governments put important people when threats materialized. Nobody expects queens to hide in studio apartments above Korean restaurants. Marcus loaded the last of Sarah's essential belongings into his pickup truck, while her security detail performed threat assessment that found his neighborhood lacking in every measurable security standard, which is exactly why it works. Sarah emerged from the diplomatic center wearing civilian clothes that made her look less like royalty and more like basketball player on off-day jeans jacket, sunglasses that failed to disguise her height or the way she moved with combat readiness most people never developed. She folded herself into his passenger seat with the resignation of someone trusting expertise against better judgment. The apartment smelled like the curry from downstairs mixing with old coffee and gun oil. Marcus used maintaining weapons he legally couldn't own anymore, but pragmatically refused to surrender. One room served as bedroom, living room, office, and kitchen through strategic furniture placement that suggested bachelor veteran living alone because relationships required emotional availability. He'd misplaced sometime between Kabul's and the discharge paperwork. This is where you live. Sarah surveyed the space with anthropologist interest, cataloging details that revealed character through absence of decoration. No photographs, no personal touches, nothing suggesting anyone actually lives here versus temporarily occupying space between deployments. This is where I exist between missions. Marcus cleared tactical gear off the only chair that wasn't kitchen stool or desk chair, cannibalized from office surplus. Living implies something beyond survival. I stopped doing that a while ago. She examined the medals and ribbons in his dresser drawer. The one personal item he'd unpacked kept hidden but accessible, like maintaining connection to person he used to be. These represent extraordinary service. Why hide them? Because they represent people I couldn't save, and decisions that ended my career. Marcus moved to the kitchen, starting coffee because routine created illusion of normalcy even when everything else spiraled into chaos. Most of those commendations came with body bags and funerals, where everyone thanked me for sacrifice, while avoiding eye contact that might acknowledge the cost. The nightmare hit at 0300, Marcus's body jerking awake with combat instincts, screaming threats that weren't there anymore. The couch where he'd insisted on sleeping, giving Sarah his bed, felt too soft, too safe wrong, in ways that made his skin crawl with phantom sensations of Kabul's dust and blood. He was back in that compound, Thompson's voice crackling through radio, asking for extraction, while Marcus made calculations about civilian casualties versus mission parameters. The explosion replayed in perfect detail. Fireball consuming the school building intelligence had sworn was enemy stronghold. Children's screams cutting through tactical frequencies. Thompson's last transmission breaking into static and silence. Marcus had pulled survivors from rubble for 6 hours, small bodies that weighed nothing and everything, while his commanding officer screamed orders to abort and return to base. "Commander," Sarah's voice cut through the memory, hand on his shoulder, grounding him in present reality. "You're safe. The threat isn't real." Marcus blinked, recognizing his apartment instead of Afghan rubble, Sarah's concerned face instead of Thompson's accusing ghost. His hands were shaking, sweat soaking through his shirt, heart rate elevated like he'd been running for his life instead of sleeping on secondhand furniture. "Sorry." He forced the word past constricted throat, professional shame flooding through him because weakness in front of protected asset was failure of duty. PTSD episode. They happen sometimes. Sarah sat beside him on the couch, close enough that her presence felt stabilizing rather than threatening. "Tell me what you saw." The words came out in fragments, cobbled children, Thompson dying because Marcus chose saving civilians over following orders. The discharge paperwork that called it medical reasons when everyone knew the truth, he'd refused to commit war crime, and military couldn't allow that kind of precedent. "Among Valorians, we call it battle scar of the mind." Sarah spoke quietly, sharing instead of instructing. "Our culture treats it as weakness, warriors who cannot move past. Violence are considered defective, unsuitable for continued service. I've lost soldiers under my command, ordered missions that resulted in casualties I approved but couldn't prevent. The weight of those decisions doesn't diminish with rank or responsibility." "Does it diminish at all?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity beneath the question, because therapists had never given him answers that felt true. "No, but it becomes bearable when you find purpose beyond the weight, something worth carrying the burden for." She paused, vulnerability crossing her features. "You chose saving children over your career. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's exactly the kind of strength my people have forgotten how to value." The moment stretched between acknowledging shared damage and respecting boundaries neither was ready to cross. Marcus broke eye contact first, returning to tactical planning, because feelings were complicated and threat assessment provided comfortable alternative. "We have 48 hours before your deadline." Marcus pulled up his laptop, displaying the conspiracy web he'd constructed from personnel files and financial records. "Keith, Park, Barnes, Mitchell. They're connected, but we need proof that survives legal scrutiny. Accusations without evidence just make us look paranoid." "What do you suggest?" Theron had remained standing near the door, guardian posture that suggested he'd never truly relaxed since entering Marcus's space. "We force their hand. Create situation where they have to act, then document everything." Marcus highlighted the upcoming summit schedule. Tomorrow there's diplomatic reception at Kennedy Center. 2,000 attendees, 47 species represented, security nightmare that makes today's attack look simple. They'll try again because opportunity is too perfect to waste. You want to use Her Majesty as bait. Theron's hand moved toward his sidearm, protective instinct overriding diplomatic restraint. "I want to use holographic projection as bait while Sarah stays here under your protection." Marcus met his eyes without backing down. "I'll attend the reception, make myself visible target alongside technology that fooled everyone in rehearsals. When assassins come, we capture them alive and extract information about who's funding this conspiracy." Sarah stood her height, making Marcus's small apartment feel smaller. "I don't hide while others face danger in my place. That's not who I am. It's who you need to be until we eliminate the threat." Marcus stood as well, refusing to be intimidated by size difference that was significant but irrelevant to strategic logic. Your Majesty, you hired me to protect you. Let me do my job without heroic gestures that get us both killed. The tension balanced on warrior pride meeting protective pragmatism. Finally, Sarah nodded, once conceding the argument without surrendering authority. Tomorrow you attend in my place. But I want real-time communication. The moment shooting starts, I'm coming. Kennedy Center glittered with diplomatic optimism and security theater crystal chandeliers illuminating gathering that represented humanity's best attempt at cosmopolitan sophistication. Marcus wore suit borrowed from Theron that fit badly and concealed body armor that fit worse, earpiece connecting him to Sarah back at his apartment, and security teams scattered throughout the venue. The guest list included senators, ambassadors, corporate executives who profited from interspecies trade, and military contractors whose business models required occasional diplomatic failures to justify defense budgets. Laura Barnes arrived fashionably late, State Department elegance, and practiced smile that had negotiated treaties across 3 administrations. She worked the room with professional grace, touching elbows, exchanging pleasantries, positioning herself near the Valorian delegation while maintaining plausible deniability about targeted networking. Marcus tracked her through the crowd, peripheral vision, cataloging everyone within strike range, while his conscious mind maintained conversation with junior diplomat who thought Black Ops veterans wanted to discuss trade policy nuances. The room held 12 potential shooters by his count, security contractors positioned too perfectly, servers moving with military precision, photographers whose equipment cases could hide long rifles. Barnes is moving toward the stage. Theron's voice came through the earpiece, calm observation masking operational awareness. 3 minutes until the Queen's scheduled speech. Except the Queen was 5 miles away in Marcus's apartment, and the speech would be delivered by holographic projection, sophisticated enough to fool everyone, except assassins who knew their target would be present in person. The technology had been Theron's suggestion, Valorian diplomatic innovation that allowed remote participation while maintaining physical security. Marcus positioned himself stage left, sightlines clear, body language projecting veteran boredom with diplomatic proceedings, while nervous system ran combat calculations about angles, distances, escape routes. The speech began with platitudes about unity and cooperation, words that sounded profound in acoustically perfect venue, but meant nothing to people planning murder. Movement in the balcony triggered his awareness, photographer adjusting equipment, lens too long for venue photography, position too perfect for anything except high-value target elimination. Marcus keyed his radio twice alert signal and started moving before conscious thought finished processing threat assessment. The first shot shattered holographic projection, revealing technological deception to everyone in attendance. Panic erupted with predictable efficiency, screaming, running security contractors, drawing weapons while trying to identify shooter position in chaos that made coordinated response impossible. Marcus hit the photographer at full sprint, years falling away into trained reflex that remembered how to tackle armed assailants off elevated positions. They crashed into orchestra seating, Marcus absorbing impact that would have broken ribs if body armor hadn't distributed force across reinforced plates. The rifle clattered away, high-precision weapon that cost more than Marcus's annual salary and came with serial numbers filed off by someone professional. The photographer fought with training that confirmed military background strikes aimed at vulnerable points, grappling that suggested combat sports rather than self-defense classes. Marcus broke the assassin's arm with leverage and bodyweight submission, hold perfected in training rooms before most of these security contractors learned basic hand-to-hand. The screaming stopped when he applied pressure that made continued resistance feel less appealing than unconsciousness. Security swarmed the balcony, weapons drawn, shouting commands that Marcus ignored while zip-tying the assassin's wrists behind his broken arm with the casual brutality of someone who'd done this in worse conditions. Theron arrived first, weapon holstered but ready, expression, confirming this had gone exactly according to plan. Stage is clear, the hologram fooled them. Theron spoke into his radio while Marcus searched the assassin for identification weapons, anything that connected him to the conspiracy. All attendees are evacuating to secure areas. Marcus found the wallet credential identifying the assassin as James Mitchell, a nephew to General Raymond Mitchell, employed by same security contractor that staffed the Galactic Diplomatic Center, Honorable discharge from Marine Corps with sniper qualification and deployment history in places that officially never saw American military presence. Family connection confirmed. Marcus showed Theron the identification. Mitchell's nephew trained sniper employed by security firm that Barnes's investment portfolio owns through 3 shell companies. The conspiracy isn't just connected, it's incestuous. 5 more shooters emerged from the chaos, converging on the stage with coordinated precision that suggested professional kill team rather than opportunistic violence. Marcus assessed odds with the fatalism of someone who'd survived worse through combination of skill and luck that couldn't last forever. 5 armed operators, 1 exhausted veteran with body armor, and borrowed suit security teams scattered throughout venue responding to evacuation protocols that pulled them away from actual threat. The mathematics suggested dying heroically while buying Theron time to escape with the captured assassin. Marcus drew the pistol Theron had provided, Glock 19 familiar weight magazine holding 15 rounds that wouldn't be enough against 5 targets who knew he was there. Get him out! Marcus positioned himself between the approaching shooters and Theron, weapon raised in firing stance. That felt like coming home after too long away. Evidence doesn't matter if we're both dead. I'm not leaving you to face 5 operators alone. Theron pulled his own weapon, Valorian plasma pistol, that made Marcus's Glock look like museum piece. You're leaving because someone has to tell Sarah what happened here, and that someone isn't me. Marcus fired twice, suppressing shots that forced the shooters into cover and bought precious seconds. Now move before I die regretting heroic gestures. Theron ran, dragging the captured assassin with strength that made the broken arm protest loud enough to echo through the venue. The 5 shooters advanced with operational discipline, leapfrogging cover, maintaining overlapping fields of fire that demonstrated training most special operations units would respect. Marcus fell back towards stage left, exit trading shots that kept them honest. Without wasting ammunition he couldn't afford to spare. The body armor stopped 2 rounds center mass impact spreading across plates designed to distribute force, but still hitting hard enough to crack ribs and make breathing feel optional. Movement from his 6 o'clock third shooter, flanking through service corridor plasma rifle, charging with distinctive whine that preceded lethal discharge. Marcus spun, bringing his Glock around too slow, combat instinct screaming that this was how it ended after 30 years of cheating death in places that didn't care about American exceptionalism. The plasma bolt never arrived. Young Marine in dress blues tackled the shooter from behind, wrestling for the weapon with desperate courage that suggested more heart than tactical training. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, 25 years old, embassy security detail, fighting like his life depended on disarming threats 3 times his experience level. Marcus didn't waste the opening. He put 2 rounds through the downed shooter's center mass, killing efficiency that had kept him alive through 3 decades of close-quarters combat. Morrison rolled away, breathing hard, eyes wide with adrenaline and realization that he'd just killed his first enemy combatant. Stay down, Lieutenant. Marcus pulled Morrison behind overturned chairs, checking the young officer for injuries, while tracking remaining shooters through peripheral vision. You just saved my life. Don't throw yours away by trying to be hero. Sir, I'm Marine Corps. Morrison's voice shook, but his hands were steady, reaching for the fallen shooter's plasma rifle, with determination that suggested he'd come to fight rather than observe. Heroism is in the job description. The body armor stopped 2 more rounds, Marcus going down hard, as impacts overwhelmed his ability to remain vertical. Vision grayed at the edges, ribs screaming protest that graduated into agony, weapons slipping from hands that suddenly couldn't grip properly. He was done, 58 years old and finally out of miracles, dying in diplomatic venue while protecting Queen who wasn't even present. Morrison was there providing covering fire that kept shooters suppressed while dragging Marcus behind better protection. The young officer moved with controlled aggression that came from training, translating into real-world application, each shot placed with precision that made veteran operators reassess their tactics. Stay with me, Commander. Morrison's voice cut through the pain and noise and combat stimulation that wanted Marcus to surrender consciousness. Help's coming. Just stay with me. The cavalry arrived in form of Sarah Valen, crashing through stage right entrance with Valorian war cry that made crystal chandeliers vibrate sympathetically. She wore combat armor Marcus hadn't known existed, sleek, functional, covering vital areas, while allowing mobility that her ceremonial pieces sacrificed for appearance. The plasma rifle in her hands spoke with authority that made conventional weapons sound inadequate. Two shooters died before they could adjust tactics to account for 8-foot warrior queen, who apparently believed staying safe meant ignoring direct orders from security professionals. Sarah moved with combat grace that confirmed she'd led soldiers in actual warfare, not just diplomatic negotiations. Each shot placed with precision that came from practice measured in years. Each movement economical in the way veterans learned after watching amateurs waste energy on flourish. Marcus forced himself upright, ribs protesting, but functional enough, and engaged the remaining shooters with renewed appreciation for backup he'd told himself he didn't need. They fought as unit without discussing tactics, high-low coverage, overlapping fields of fire, instinctive coordination that came from understanding violence, the same way musicians understood harmony. The last shooter died trying to retreat Sarah's plasma bolt, catching him center mass and ending the threat with finality that made surrender impossible. Silence descended like funeral shroud, broken only by emergency alarms and distant sirens, responding to crisis that had already resolved itself through application of overwhelming force. "You were supposed to stay at my apartment." Marcus lowered his weapon, checking corners with residual paranoia that never quite believed the shooting had stopped. "That was the plan we agreed to. Plans change when I hear my protector taking fire from 5 attackers." Sarah approached, checking him for injuries with clinical efficiency that suggested medical training. "You're bleeding, cracked ribs, maybe internal bleeding, definitely bruised ego." Marcus accepted her hand up because pride seemed less important than remaining vertical. "But I'm alive, which is better outcome than the math suggested." Morrison stood shakily processing his first real combat with a 1,000-yard stare that came from crossing threshold between training and application. The young Marine had killed at least one enemy and saved Marcus's life, doing it baptism by fire that would define his entire career. "Good work, Lieutenant." Marcus gripped Morrison's shoulder, soldier to soldier, acknowledgement that transcended rank. "You just earned yourself reputation as Marine who doesn't panic when shooting starts. That's worth more than medals." "Sir, Morrison's voice cracked slightly. "I killed someone. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves." "That's what we do. The distinction matters even when it doesn't feel like it does." The standoff happened in Kennedy Center, loading Doc General Mitchell, arriving with 50 armed military police backing his authority against Sarah's legal argument, and Theron's 20 Valorian guards, who looked eager for excuse to demonstrate why their species had conquered 17 star systems. Marcus stood beside Sarah Ribs, screaming, blood seeping through his shirt, weapon holstered but ready because sometimes diplomacy failed, and violence became the only language both sides understood. "General Mitchell, you're interfering with the investigation of attempted assassination." Sarah's voice carried across the loading dock with projection that made everyone present stop and listen. "Stand down immediately or I'll have you arrested for obstruction. With all due respect, Your Majesty, this is American soil and those suspects are American citizens." Mitchell's hand rested near his sidearm, not quite threatening, but definitely not relaxed. "They fall under my jurisdiction regardless of who they tried to kill." "Your nephew is one of the shooters we captured." Marcus kept his voice conversational, stating facts without accusation, because provocation would escalate into firefight nobody could win. "Along with employees from security contractor that receives funding from Laura Barnes's investment portfolio. The conspiracy involves American officials trying to start war between Earth and Valor. You really want that investigation happening through military police under your command." Mitchell's expression confirmed everything Marcus suspected and nothing they could prove without evidence currently zip-tied in the Valorian transport vehicle. "Careful making accusations you can't substantiate, Commander Cole. Paranoid veterans see conspiracies everywhere, especially when they're suffering from documented PTSD. The attack came fast, 4 military police moving with coordinated precision toward the transport vehicle trying to extract the captured assassin before Valorian guards could respond. Marcus drew and fired in single motion, suppressing shots that forced them into cover without actually killing American military personnel, because that created diplomatic incidents even Sarah's authority couldn't contain. Theron's guards returned fire with plasma weapons that made very clear Valorians weren't intimidated by superior numbers or home field advantage. The loading dock became war zone for 90 seconds, muzzle flashes and plasma bolts, painting violence in stroboscopic light. Marcus emptied his magazine, providing covering fire while Sarah physically shielded the transport vehicle, her armor absorbing hits that would have killed unprotected humans. The shooting stopped when additional sirens announced FBI Secret Service and Metropolitan Police, creating audience that made continued violence politically expensive for everyone involved. Mitchell withdrew his people with the calculated retreat of someone who'd lost this battle, but recognized that wars lasted longer than single engagements. "This isn't over, Commander." Mitchell met Marcus's eyes across the loading dock, promise more than threat. "You've made powerful enemies today. I've been making powerful enemies for 30 years, General." Marcus reloaded with automatic efficiency while maintaining eye contact that refused submission. "The ones who are still alive learn to respect the difference between enemies and existential threats. You should consider which category you want to occupy on." The standoff dissolved into bureaucratic negotiation that lasted 40 minutes, Mitchell's military police surrounding the loading dock, Sarah invoking diplomatic treaties, FBI, and Secret Service arriving to prevent interagency gunfight that would make national news. Eventually, Article 12 of the Interspecies Treaty won through legal weight and political calculation that nobody wanted responsibility for starting war over custody dispute. Mitchell watched them leave with expression promising future consequences, but future was problem for later. The shuttle carried them through DC traffic sirens, clearing path, while news helicopters tracked their progress, like observing diplomatic incident in real time. Marcus sat in back with Sarah and the captured assassin Morrison riding shotgun with 1,000-yard stare that suggested processing combat trauma in ways therapists would spend years unpacking. The news broke while they were still en route, every screen simultaneously displaying Valorian warships entering Earth orbit. Duke Saren's face broadcast across global networks with ultimatum that made diplomatic niceties irrelevant. "Queen Sarah Valen will surrender herself to Valorian custody within 24 hours, or I will interpret her refusal as act of war against legitimate Valorian authority." Saren's voice carried aristocratic certainty of someone who'd never been told no by people who mattered. "Earth has choice: deliver one criminal queen or face consequences of harboring fugitive who's destabilized our government through illegal policies and unauthorized relationships with inferior species." Marcus watched the broadcast on Morrison's tablet, cataloging 3 warships in orbital positions that could level major cities before Earth's defense systems mounted effective response. The mathematics were brutal. Saren had brought enough firepower to make his ultimatum credible positioning that suggested military advisor who understood Earth's defensive capabilities and their limitations. "He's not trying to capture you." Marcus turned to face Sarah, seeing fear she wouldn't voice mixed with rage at being threatened by her own people. "He's trying to start a war. Kill you publicly as traitor, use your death as justification for military action against Earth. Defense contractors, profit, traditionalists consolidate power, and everyone blames the dead queen for diplomatic failure." Sarah's expression hardened with recognition of conspiracy that extended beyond assassination into calculated provocation designed to restart military expansion that her policies had ended. "Then we have 24 hours to capture him first and expose this conspiracy before he can claim victim status." The captured assassin laughed despite zip-tied wrists and broken arm, bitter amusement cutting through pain medication. "You think you can assault Duke Saren's flagship, 300 Valorian soldiers, defensive systems designed to repel boarding actions, command structure that's survived 4 wars. You're delusional." Marcus studied the assassin with professional interest, recognizing bravado that covered genuine fear. "Or were desperate enough to try what sane people wouldn't attempt. Desperation makes dangerous opponents, as you're about to discover during interrogation." The Valorian embassy occupied 12 acres in northwest DC sovereign territory, protected by diplomatic treaties and enough firepower to discourage casual trespass. Marcus sat in the medical bay while doctors treated cracked ribs and internal bruising with Valorian technology that accelerated healing from weeks into days. The blue gel cooled pain to manageable levels and made breathing feel less like stabbing himself with every inhalation. Morrison occupied the bed beside him, receiving treatment for plasma burns and shock that came from killing his first enemy combatant at 25 years old. The young Marine stared at ceiling tiles with expression that suggested mentally replaying every decision and wondering which ones would haunt him longest. "You did good today, Lieutenant." Marcus spoke quietly, not quite breaking Morrison's introspection, but offering exit from whatever dark thoughts were circling. That shooter would have killed me if you hadn't intervened. Quick thinking under pressure, that's what separates survivors from casualties. Sir, I'm not sure I can do this. Morrison's voice carried doubt that military training tried to eliminate, but combat experience inevitably revealed. The shooting, the killing, knowing I ended someone's life. They teach you it's necessary, but they don't teach you how it feels. It feels terrible. Marcus shifted carefully, ribs protesting movement. That's how you know you're still human instead of weapon. The day killing feels easy is the day you need to quit because you've lost the thing that makes judgment worthwhile. How do you carry it? All the people you've killed, all the missions that went wrong, all the teammates who didn't come home poorly. Marcus offered honesty instead of comfort because Morrison deserved truth more than platitudes. I carry it poorly with nightmares and PTSD and medication I don't take because being numb feels worse than being damaged. But I carry it anyway because the alternative is giving up, and I'm too stubborn for that. Sarah entered the medical bay with Theron both carrying tablets displaying interrogation results that suggested the captured assassin had proven willing to cooperate once he understood his options involved talking or being delivered to American authorities who'd disappear him to prevent scandal. His name is James Mitchell, confirmed nephew to the general. Theron pulled up confession recorded during interrogation. He's admitted to receiving orders through encrypted channels, payment deposited in cryptocurrency that traces back to shell companies. But he claims not to know ultimate client identity, compartmentalized information. Standard operational security. Marcus accepted pain medication from the doctor with reluctance born from knowing it would dull combat readiness along with physical discomfort. Each level of conspiracy insulates the next. Mitchell gives orders to his nephew. Barnes provides funding. Through corporate layers, Keith supplies intelligence about schedules and security. None of them directly connect to Saren unless we can prove coordination. We have 24 hours before Saren's deadline expires. Sarah's voice carried weight of command decisions that would define her reign and possibly end it. We need leverage that survives both legal challenges and military threats. Something that forces him to stand down or exposes the conspiracy so completely that continuing becomes politically impossible. Marcus sat up carefully, medical equipment, protesting his movement with electronic warnings about continuing treatment. We force his hand directly. Capture Saren, get confession on record, broadcast it before he can claim victimhood. But that requires assaulting flagship defended by 300 soldiers using tactics they won't expect from people they've underestimated. You're suggesting we infiltrate Valorian warship in Earth orbit. Morrison's voice carried disbelief mixed with dawning understanding that this was exactly what they were suggesting. Sir, that's suicide mission. Most worthwhile missions are. Marcus met the young Marine's eyes, seeing reflection of himself at the 25, idealistic, brave, not yet understanding how many ways courage could fail. Question is whether you're willing to die for something that matters or live knowing you could have prevented war but chose safety instead. The phone buzzed at 0700, Miller's voice carrying urgency that transcended 3 years of not speaking regularly. Brother, heard you're planning something spectacularly stupid. Rodriguez called me, said you might need the kind of backup that doesn't come through official channels. Marcus stood at the embassy window watching dawn break over D.C. while calculating odds that kept getting worse with every tactical analysis. What kind of backup are we discussing? The kind where 8 old operators who remember when missions mattered more than political cover drop everything to have your back one more time. Miller paused, traffic noise in background, suggesting he was already en route. We're not young anymore, Marcus, but we're mean enough that young doesn't matter when the shooting starts. The team assembled in the embassy's secure briefing room by noon 9 veterans, whose combined age exceeded 5 centuries, and whose collective body count remained classified across multiple agencies and countries that preferred plausible deniability. Miller looked exactly like Marcus remembered from Kabul, weathered, competent, carrying himself with relaxed confidence of someone who'd survived situations that killed better prepared men. Jackson had put on weight around the middle but still moved with economy that came from 2 decades running covert operations in Central America. Rodriguez, different Rodriguez than the engineering chief. This one former Delta Force had retired to Montana and looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. The others filed in with similar energy: Kowalski, Patterson, Williams, Chen, David Thompson, carrying grief for his younger brother Jake that had calcified into something useful rather than paralyzing. They wore civilian clothes that concealed weapons and tactical gear, greeting each other with abbreviated efficiency of people who'd shared foxholes and knew that reunion small talk wasted time they might not have. Appreciate you coming on short notice. Marcus stood at the briefing table tactical display showing Saren's flagship in orbital position that threatened every major city on eastern seaboard. Here's the situation: Duke Saren has 24 hours to force Sarah's surrender or initiate military action against Earth. We're going to capture him first, extract confession broadcast evidence that makes continuing his conspiracy politically impossible. So we're looking at the clock running down each while assaulting warship defended by 300 Valorian soldiers. Miller studied the display with focus that had made him legendary at pattern analysis. What's the play? Saren's sending diplomatic shuttle to collect Sarah at 1800 hours tomorrow. He believes she'll surrender to prevent war. That's his psychological weakness, assuming everyone values peace over principle. Marcus pulled up shuttle specifications. We hijack the shuttle, use it to board the flagship, capture Saren before his crew realizes the deception. That's not assault plan, that's magic trick. Patterson leaned forward, studying schematics with skepticism born from 40 years of operations that looked good on paper and failed in execution. You're betting everything on Saren not verifying passenger identity before shuttle docks. I'm betting on aristocratic arrogance. Marcus highlighted security protocols that relied on authentication codes rather than visual confirmation. Saren expects surrender, not attack. His defensive posture is designed for external threats, not infiltration using his own transportation. We exploit that assumption. The wild card arrived at 1400 hours. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, wearing civilian clothes instead of dress blues, standing in the briefing room with earnest intensity that suggested he'd heard about the mission through channels he shouldn't have accessed, and decided unauthorized participation was preferable to sitting safely on sidelines. Sir, requesting permission to join the operation. Morrison stood at a tension that suggested recent graduation from officer training hadn't yet been beaten out of him by reality. I have technical expertise in Valorian systems and orbital insertion protocols. You'll need someone who can interface with their command structure. Marcus studied the kid, 25 years old, idealistic eyes that had killed one enemy combatant at Kennedy Center but hadn't yet seen sustained combat. You understand this is unsanctioned operation that will end your military career if it fails, and probably end it if we succeed. Yes, sir. I understand the risks and the consequences. Morrison held his gaze without wavering. But I also understand that some things matter more than career advancement. Stopping wars before they start. Standing up when institutional response fails. Those lessons were in the leadership manual they gave me at Quantico, even if they didn't mention getting court-martialed for following them. Leadership manual didn't cover joining retired operators on unauthorized assault of foreign spacecraft. Miller's tone carried amusement beneath warning. You sure you thought this through, Lieutenant? I'm sure that if good people do nothing bad, people win. Morrison's jaw set with stubborn conviction that reminded Marcus of himself before Cobble taught him that good intentions didn't prevent bad outcomes. My technical expertise gives this mission better chance of success. That makes participation worth whatever consequences follow. Welcome to the team, Lieutenant. Marcus offered handshake that made Morrison's inclusion binding in ways paperwork never could. Try not to get killed before you learn why experience beats enthusiasm. The preparation took 18 hours equipment acquisition through channels that remain carefully undocumented, rehearsals using embassy facilities converted into improvised training spaces, contingency planning for the dozen ways this could fail catastrophically. Morrison proved his value immediately, hacking Valorian shuttle authentication codes and mapping flagship internal layout with expertise that suggested the kid had been preparing for exactly this kind of unauthorized access long before volunteering. The diplomatic shuttle arrived precisely at 1800 hours pilot, expecting to collect surrendering Queen, and finding instead 9 operators and 1 young Marine who'd killed the flight crew with efficiency that made the hijacking look routine. Morrison took pilot controls with confidence that came from simulator hours, converting into actual flight time, broadcasting authentication codes that convinced flagship security everything was proceeding according to Saren's expectations. The docking sequence felt like eternity, measured in heartbeats. Shuttle connecting to flagship airlock, pressure, equalizing inner doors, opening to reveal corridor that should have been empty but wasn't. 20 Valorian guards stood at attention ceremonial formation to receive their captured queen, realizing too late that the figures emerging from the shuttle were armed operators, moving with lethal purpose. The firefight lasted 30 seconds, plasma weapons filling the corridor with superheated death, Marcus dropping 4 guards before they could raise alarm, while his team secured the docking bay with practiced efficiency. Morrison sealed the inner doors, isolating their entry point and buying precious time before fleet security realized infiltration had occurred. Bridge is 4 levels up command deck adjacent to Saren's quarters. Morrison pulled up tactical overlay on his suit display. We have maybe 3 minutes before automated systems notice unauthorized access and trigger general alarm. Then we move fast. Marcus led point position, weapon raised every corner, becoming potential ambush in ship, designed to repel exactly this kind of assault. They advanced through corridors with speed that sacrificed stealth for momentum, killing 6 more guards who responded too slowly to threats they hadn't trained to recognize. The general alarm triggered at minute 4, klaxons screaming throughout the flagship, while automated defenses activated and security doors sealed to prevent unauthorized movement. They were trapped between levels 3 and 4, Morrison frantically overriding security protocols, while Marcus's team established defensive perimeter against Valorian soldiers converging from both directions. 30 hostiles approaching from below, another 20 from above. Miller coordinated defensive positions with calm that came from surviving worse through competence and luck that couldn't last forever. We hold here until Morrison gets us access, or we run out of ammunition, whichever comes first. The first assault came hard, 40 Valorian soldiers breaching from multiple directions, plasma fire filling the intersection with heat that made breathing feel like inhaling molten metal. Marcus dropped 6 with precision that came from muscle memory, older than most of these soldiers' careers, each shot placed where Valorian anatomy made them vulnerable. Williams held left flank, Chen anchored right, decades of experience translating into economy of motion that made warfare look choreographed. Morrison worked frantically at the access panel, sweat streaming down his face while plasma bolts passed close enough to singe his uniform. Almost there, just need another minute. We don't have another minute, Patterson fired in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition, while Valorian numbers made conservation feel increasingly theoretical. They're flanking through maintenance corridors. The security door opened with hydraulic hiss that sounded like salvation. Morrison's triumph cut short by plasma bolt that caught him in the shoulder and spun him away from the controls. The young Marine went down, hard armor smoking blood spreading across deck plating in pattern that suggested arterial damage. Marcus was there immediately, dragging Morrison through the open door, while Miller provided covering fire that kept Valorian soldiers honest. The team fell back through the opening, sealing the door behind them with emergency protocols that would buy maybe 2 minutes before cutting torches breached their barrier. The medical bay was 3 doors down, Marcus kicking it open and pulling Morrison inside, while the kid's face went pale with blood loss that suggested minutes rather than hours. Sarah appeared from somewhere she'd insisted on joining, despite every tactical argument against it, moving with practiced efficiency to apply Valorian field medicine that human technology couldn't match. "Stay with me, Lieutenant." Sarah worked with focus that came from treating combat casualties in actual warfare. "You're not dying in some corridor before we finish this mission." "Did we?" Morrison's eyes found Marcus's face recognition still present beneath shock. "Did we get through?" "You got us through." Marcus gripped the young Marine's uninjured shoulder, watching Sarah work medical miracles with technology that made human emergency medicine look primitive. "Mission continues because you broke their security." "That matters, Jake. You matter." The assault on the command deck happened at minute 12, Marcus leading 6 operators against position, defended by Duke Saren's personal guard, 30 elite soldiers who trained their entire careers for exactly this scenario. The mathematics suggested dying heroically, while maybe capturing their target odds that Marcus had accepted the moment Miller called with offer of backup. They hit the command deck with grenades that disoriented rather than killed, following with coordinated assault that exploited confusion to establish foothold in defensive position designed to be impregnable. Marcus dropped 8 guards in the first 90 seconds, weapon singing, with discharge that made Valorian plasma rifles sound quiet by comparison. Miller took the left approach. Jackson secured right, 3 decades of experience, making the impossible look routine through application of violence and tactical expertise. Saren stood at the command station, aristocratic features twisted with rage at seeing his flagship invaded by species he'd declared inferior. He reached for the self-destruct authorization movement that suggested panic overriding strategic thinking and willingness to die rather than face capture. Marcus shot him tranquilizer dart loaded with a sedative calibrated for Valorian metabolism, dropping the Duke mid-reach before he could trigger explosion that would have killed everyone aboard and eliminated all evidence of conspiracy. Saren collapsed with undignified sprawl of someone chemically unconscious, aristocratic bearing reduced to unconscious weight that required two operators to restrain. Package secured. Marcus keyed transmission to Sarah, still working on Morrison 3 decks below. Beginning extraction. How's the lieutenant? Critical but stable. Sarah's voice carried stress that suggested stable was relative term, requiring continued medical intervention. I've stopped the bleeding, but he needs surgical facilities we don't have on this ship. The diplomatic shuttle was compromised, scuttled during the initial assault to prevent Valorian forces from using it against them. That left commandeering one of the flagship's own escape craft military shuttles, designed for emergency evacuation fast enough to reach Earth before Saren's remaining warships could intercept. Morrison piloted despite shoulder injury that made right arm mostly useless. Left hand working controls, while Sarah's medical nanites did their work inside tissue that would have been unsalvageable with human technology. The young Marine flew with determination that overrode pain and shock, getting them clear of the flagship before its crew organized pursuit. The confession happened during atmospheric re-entry, Saren regaining consciousness to find himself zip-tied and surrounded by operators who'd lost friends capturing him. Morrison's tablet recorded everything the Duke detailing conspiracy with precision that came from believing diplomatic immunity would protect him even now. Barnes approached me 8 months ago with proposal to eliminate Queen Sarah. Saren's aristocratic tone persisted despite circumstances. She offered trade agreements favoring her defense contractors in exchange for my cooperation. General Mitchell provided tactical support through his nephew and security personnel. Keith supplied intelligence about the Queen's movements and vulnerabilities. The assassination attempt at the diplomatic center was carefully planned to appear as system malfunction, plausible deniability for all parties involved. Why try to start war with Earth? Marcus kept his weapon visible reminder that Saren's confession was being given under duress that made lies inadvisable. Your conspiracy extended beyond simple assassination into military provocation. What did you gain from threatening planetary conflict? War makes weapons valuable, and peace makes them irrelevant. Saren spoke with calculated honesty of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to protect. Barnes's contractors profit from military expansion. My traditionalist faction gains political power by proving Queen Sarah's diplomatic approach was naive failure. Earth becomes cautionary tale about trusting alien species who see humans as tools rather than partners. Everyone wins except the dead, and there are always acceptable casualties when power is at stake. The recording went out simultaneously to every major news outlet, uploaded through channels that made suppression impossible and deletion theoretical. Within 20 minutes, Barnes's face was on every screen trying to explain why attempted assassination of foreign royalty constituted patriotic defense of American interests. Mitchell faced similar exposure before FBI agents arrived to discuss his nephew's confession and the bodies at Kennedy Center. The landing happened at Andrews Air Force Base, military personnel securing the shuttle, while medical teams rushed Morrison to emergency surgery that would determine whether Sarah's field medicine had been sufficient to save his life. Marcus watched them carry the young Marine away, 25 years old and dying because he'd volunteered for a mission that should have been impossible, but succeeded through combination of courage and technical expertise. The waiting room felt like every other hospital Marcus had occupied, sterile lighting, uncomfortable chairs, clock that moved too slowly while measuring time in units that felt increasingly precious. Sarah sat beside him, still wearing combat armor, scorched by plasma impacts, silence stretching between them like shared vigil for someone who'd earned their concern through sacrifice. He saved my life at Kennedy Center. Marcus spoke quietly, watching surgical, suite doors that hadn't opened in 3 hours. Then he saved the mission by breaking flagship security. 25 years old, and he's already done more that matters than most people accomplish in lifetime. The surgery lasted 6 hours, doctors emerging with cautious optimism that suggested Morrison would survive, but recovery would measure in months rather than weeks. The plasma damage had been extensive. Sarah's medical intervention, the only reason he had survived long enough to reach surgical facilities. They'd rebuilt shoulder joint using combination of human and Valorian medical technology, creating hybrid solution that matched the mission's nature. Marcus visited Morrison's room at midnight, finding the young Marine awake despite sedation that should have kept him unconscious. The lieutenant's eyes focused, slowly, recognition dawning beneath pharmaceutical haze. "Sir, did we get him? Did it work?" "We got him." Marcus pulled chair beside the hospital bed, suddenly exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. Saren's confession is playing on every news channel. Barnes is being arrested on live television. Mitchell's facing military tribunal. "You stopped a war, Lieutenant. That's legacy worth the price you paid." "I can't feel my right arm." Morrison's voice carried fear beneath sedation. "Doctors said there might be permanent nerve damage. My career as Marine is probably over before it really started. Your career as hero is just beginning." Marcus gripped Morrison's left hand, soldier-to-soldier connection that transcended rank and age. "They're talking about establishing interspecies military academy training ground, where humans and Valorians learn to work together instead of against each other. You'd be perfect for teaching staff, assuming you survived the bureaucracy trying to court-martial you for saving the world without proper authorization." The trial preparations began within days, Barnes and Mitchell facing federal charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, treason, and violations of interspecies treaty obligations. Keith faced Valorian justice on his homeworld, traditional punishment for treason that made American prison sentences look merciful. Saren's fate remained uncertain, political maneuvering attempting to salvage his family's reputation, until Sarah's testimony cut through diplomatic pretense, with evidence that left no room for mitigation. "Duke Saren orchestrated assassination attempts against me personally." Sarah testified before Joint Congressional Valorian Tribunal, her words broadcast across both civilizations. "He threatened war against Earth to force my surrender or death." He admitted on recorded confession to conspiracy involving American officials and financial incentives that place profit above peace. The evidence is irrefutable, and the consequences must match the crime. The verdict came 3 weeks later. Saren received life sentence on penal colony, legacy reduced to cautionary tale about ambition exceeding wisdom. Barnes got 40 years in federal prison appeals, exhausted by evidence too comprehensive to dispute. Mitchell faced military tribunal that stripped his rank, pension, and freedom in ceremony, designed to demonstrate accountability even for decorated generals. The vindication felt hollow to Marcus, justice achieved, but paid for with Morrison's injury, and the close call that could have ended with planetary war. Victories were supposed to feel better than this, less like surviving than winning. But 30 years had taught him that surviving was winning when the alternative was body bags and diplomatic failures. The proposal came from unexpected direction. Senator Catherine Walsh, Armed Services Committee Chair, standing in Marcus's hospital room, while he recovered from cracked ribs and accumulated damage of being 58 and still doing 25-year-old's job. Commander Cole, the United States government would like to offer formal apology for the conspiracy that nearly started interstellar war. Walsh spoke with politicians' careful phrasing that acknowledged fault without accepting legal liability. "We're establishing interspecies military academy as part of reparations and diplomatic reconstruction. The facility will train personnel from all allied species in cooperative tactics, shared protocols, and mutual defense strategies. We'd like you to serve as founding director." "I'm retired." Marcus shifted carefully, ribs still protesting despite Valorian medical acceleration. "My service record ends with medical discharge and PTSD diagnosis that makes me liability for official positions. Your service record ends with preventing war through unauthorized assault on foreign spacecraft while protecting Allied head of state." Walsh's expression suggested she'd read his entire classified file and reached different conclusions than bureaucrats who'd forced his retirement. "The PTSD makes you qualified to teach warriors about cost of violence and importance of choosing battles worth the sacrifice. We need someone who understands both combat and consequences. That's you, Commander." The academy opened 6 months later in ceremony that drew diplomats from 47 species and veterans from conflicts spanning human history. Marcus stood at podium wearing dress uniform, that felt strange after years of civilian clothes and tactical gear, looking out at audience that included surviving team members Morrison in wheelchair, recovering from his third surgery, and Sarah V. Lohan, who'd become partner in ways that transcended protection detail. Lieutenant Jake Morrison believed that some things matter more than career advancement or personal safety. Marcus kept his voice steady, refusing to let emotion undermine message that needed delivering. He believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, standing up when institutional response failed, taking action instead of waiting for permission that might never come. He proved those beliefs at 25 years old, saving lives and preventing war through courage that should inspire everyone who wears uniform. The Academy bore Morrison's name in inscription above main entrance dedication, ensuring every cadet would learn about young officer who'd volunteered for impossible mission and survived to teach others. The curriculum combined human tactics with Valorian strategy, instructing warriors from multiple species that strength came from cooperation rather than dominance. Marcus taught senior seminars on tactical thinking, threat assessment, and ethical decision-making in combat situations where right answers didn't exist and hesitation killed people you had sworn to protect. The students ranged from humans barely out of high school to Valorian warriors seeking to understand how smaller species survive through cunning instead of force. Morrison joined teaching staff 6 months into operation, shoulder reconstructed through combination of human orthopedics and Valorian regenerative medicine that created hybrid solution matching his hybrid role as bridge between species. The young Marine taught advanced systems integration and orbital combat protocols expertise that had saved mission translating into curriculum that would prevent future conflicts. The relationship with Sarah evolved past professional into territory neither quite knew how to navigate warrior respect that had deepened into genuine affection, tactical cooperation that felt increasingly like partnership extending beyond security concerns. They dated with awkwardness of people whose courtship involved preventing assassination and assaulting spacecraft, learning to exist together when violence wasn't dictating interaction. The adoption paperwork arrived 8 months after Academy opening social workers apologizing for complexity while explaining that child in question required specialized placement. She was 3 years old, human Valorian hybrid created through Barnes's secret genetics program, attempting to engineer super soldiers combining human adaptability with Valorian strength. The program had been shut down after Barnes's arrest, leaving behind 3 children as evidence of crimes extending beyond assassination into eugenics and forced experimentation. Her mother, a Valorian scientist, had died during childbirth complications resulting from genetic incompatibilities that program designers had dismissed as acceptable risk. Her father's DNA had been harvested from unwilling human donors before ethics violations were discovered and program terminated. She represented both crime and possibility, evidence of conspiracy, and potential for future where species cooperation created something new rather than destroying what existed. Marcus and Sarah met her in embassy residential wing child who'd never known parents now facing potential family built from battlefield partnership and shared trauma. She looked up at them with eyes holding both human and Valorian characteristics, genetic heritage written in features suggesting what future could look like when species learn cooperation. "My name is Sarah." The queen knelt to child height, introducing herself with gentle formality that made royalty feel approachable. "This is Marcus. We'd like very much to be your family if that's acceptable to you." The girl studied them with serious consideration of someone deciding whether adults could be trusted with something as important as childhood. She reached for Marcus' first, small hand, finding his with confidence, suggesting decision already made. "Can you tell me about the war?" Her voice carried curiosity without fear, child's directness cutting through adult complications. "The social worker said you fought in wars. Were you scared every time?" Marcus lifted her, carefully aware of his strength relative to her fragility and the responsibility that came with protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. "But I fought anyway because some things are worth being scared for. Like protecting people we love." "Do you love me?" Direct question from someone too young to understand social filters that taught adults to hide truth behind politeness. "Not yet." Marcus met her eyes honestly, refusing to lie just because truth felt uncomfortable. "But I'd like chance to try." "Think you can give me that?" She nodded seriously, small arms wrapping around his neck with trust he hadn't earned but would spend remaining years trying to deserve. 5 years passed, measured in academy graduations and diplomatic successes, conflicts prevented through training that taught cooperation over confrontation. Marcus stood at Memorial Garden where Morrison's name was carved in stone, not because the lieutenant had died, but because his sacrifice at 25 had prevented war and deserved permanent recognition. His daughter, their daughter, because Sarah had adopted her, equally played nearby with children from 4 different species, innocents, suggesting the future they'd fought for was actually arriving. She was 8 years old now, tall for her age with features that combined both species in ways that made some people uncomfortable and others hopeful. Sarah found him at the memorial movement familiar enough that he recognized her presence, foreseeing her approach. Their relationship had evolved from battlefield partnership into genuine marriage 2 years ago, ceremony combining Valorian tradition with human legal requirements in ways that confused bureaucrats but satisfied participants. "You're thinking about Morrison again." Sarah spoke quietly, understanding Marcus's tendency toward introspection when standing at memorials. "Wondering if his sacrifice was worth what we built. I'm thinking that he gave up normal life at 25 so others could have futures worth living." Marcus watched their daughter demonstrate some game to younger children, rules she was inventing in real time. That's burden no one should carry, but he carried it anyway because he believed protecting others mattered more than protecting himself. And you taught him that belief. Sarah's tone carried observation without judgment. Your example, your leadership, your willingness to sacrifice for principle over career. He learned from you and applied those lessons when they mattered most. Which makes me responsible when students die, proving principles I taught them. Marcus felt familiar weight of survivor's guilt that never quite faded regardless of how many years passed or how much therapy suggested he wasn't responsible for other people's choices. Their daughter ran over, interrupting the philosophical spiral with practical question about whether parents would watch her demonstrate her game. She grabbed both their hands, pulling with determination that suggested refusal wasn't an option she'd consider. "Grandpa Marcus, tell me about when you saved Grandma from the bad people." She'd heard the story dozens of times, but never tired of repetition that turned history into legend. "Did you use the special training you teach at the academy?" "Some of it." Marcus let her lead him toward the other children, Sarah walking beside them in configuration that felt like family despite unconventional origins. "But mostly I just did what needed doing because people I cared about needed protection. The training helps, but caring is what makes training matter." "Is that why you started the school?" Her 8-year-old logic connecting dots that adults complicated with philosophy and politics. "So other people could learn to protect the people they care about." Exactly right. Marcus knelt beside her, eye level with child, who represented possibility born from preventing conspiracy. "The academy teaches warriors that strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. That differences make us stronger when we work together instead of fighting against each other." The Memorial Garden held more than Morrison's name. Now 3 graduates had died in peacekeeping operations across Allied territories. Young warriors who'd learned cooperation and paid price when others preferred conflict. Each name reminded Marcus that teaching violence, even violence in service of protection, created casualties regardless of noble intentions. But the Academy had also graduated 12 classes totaling nearly 800 warriors who served in diplomatic, security, peacekeeping forces, and cultural exchange programs. The war that Saren had tried to start hadn't happened because trained personnel prevented escalation. 3 diplomatic crises had been resolved through negotiation backed by credible defense capability. The mathematics suggested lives saved vastly exceeded lives lost equation that should provide comfort, but never quite did. "You're never too old to stand up." Marcus addressed evening formation where cadets assembled for final briefing before weekend liberty. "Never too broken to protect others. Never too damaged to make difference." Lieutenant Morrison proved that at 25 when he volunteered for mission that nearly killed him. "I'm still trying to prove it at 64, teaching next generation that legacy matters more than longevity." Sarah's hand found his during the speech grip, communicating support that transcended words. Their daughter stood between them, physical representation of future they'd built through sacrifice and stubbornness, and refusal to accept that wars were inevitable when peace remained possible. The nightmares still came, occasionally Cobble replaying in perfect detail Thompson's voice asking for extraction, Marcus couldn't provide children's screams, cutting through tactical frequencies into memory that wouldn't fade regardless of medication or therapy. But the nightmares felt different now. Less like punishment and more like reminder that prices paid purchased something valuable. He'd been broken, weapon pointed at problems politicians couldn't solve through conventional means. Now he was something else, teacher father, husband to queen, who'd given him purpose beyond destruction. The transformation wasn't complete and never would be, but progress mattered more than perfection when measuring lives against ideals. Some wars are worth fighting. Marcus stood at Memorial Garden after evening formation dispersed watching stars emerge over D.C., while calculating all the ways his past had led to this improbable present. Some legacies are worth building. Some prices are worth paying. Not because they're easy or painless or guaranteed to succeed, but because the alternative is surrendering to people who profit from conflict and suffering. Morrison's name caught fading sunlight carved stone, promising that young Marine's sacrifice had purchased something more valuable than temporary peace. The academy would continue training warriors who understood cooperation graduates spreading into positions where they'd prevent conflicts before shooting started. The mathematics suggested exponential impact, each graduate influencing dozens of decisions that prevented escalation, thousands of small choices accumulating into peace, maintained through preparation rather than achieved through violence. Legacy wasn't perfect. Morrison still dealt with chronic pain from shoulder injury. 3 graduates had died serving causes they'd believed justified sacrifice, and Marcus's nightmares ensured sleep remained combat zone more often than rest. But imperfect legacy that saved lives beat perfect record of violence that had defined his career for too long. The family walked home together through embassy grounds, daughter asking questions about stars and strategy, while Sarah and Marcus provided answers that combined science with military application. 8 years old and already thinking tactically, childhood shaped by parents who'd prevented war and couldn't quite stop preparing for next one. Marcus Cole had learned redemption's price late in life, but learned it thoroughly, futures worth the sacrifices that made them possible. Students who understood strength served protection instead of domination, proving old warriors still mattered when they chose fighting for something bigger than themselves. The war was over. The legacy had begun. And somewhere in space between those truths, Broken Soldier had found something worth living for instead of dying over family built from battlefield. Academy training, next generation peace maintained through preparation that made violence unnecessary. Tomorrow would bring new threats and challenges requiring solutions he'd spent decades learning to provide. But tonight he had daughter asking about Star's wife who understood warrior's heart purpose that extended beyond survival into legacy that might outlast his damaged memory. That felt like victory worth the cost of earning it.